Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, all praise be to Allah, the Lord of the heavens and the earth, and peace and blessings be upon our beloved messenger, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. O Allah, grant us knowledge, wisdom and sincerity. Dear brothers and sisters, I am your host, Hatim al-Abdus Salam. I salute you all with the salutation of the people of paradise. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Please join me in welcoming my distinguished guest, Sheikh Kahlan bin Nabhan al-Kharusi, the Assistant Grand Mufti of the Sultanate of Oman. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah, Brother Hatim. And I would like as well to welcome our audience. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. May Allah the Almighty guide us all to the right path and shower our lives with His mercy.
Ameen. How are you today, Sheikh?
Thank you very much, Brother Hatim. I'm very well. And I hope that this session is going to meet the concern of our audience and answer their questions on different matters that they are sending to us.
Sheikh, if you allow me, we'll start with the list of questions that we have today. The very first question says, can someone perform Hajj or Umrah on behalf of his deceased relative without being this request in the will of the deceased?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. All praise be to Allah, peace and blessings be upon His last messenger. Now let's concentrate on the general principle regarding this particular issue. Now, to perform a Hajj or Umrah on behalf of a deceased or on behalf of a person who is unable, who is incapable of performing Hajj by himself or herself, generally talking, is something which is Islamically allowed. But there are some conditions to be met. First of all, either the person is deceased and he hasn't performed the obligatory Hajj during his lifetime, and the person is fulfilling a request made, a statement made by the deceased during his life, appointing somebody or making it upon his ears to perform the Hajj on his or her behalf. The second condition is, if the person is still alive, but he is unable to perform the Hajj, and his incapability is not because of financial incapability, but because of physical incapability. Because if he cannot afford to go to Hajj, then he is excused until he can do it, until he got the means, and then he or she would perform the Hajj by themselves. But if he is physically unable to perform Hajj, then in this case it can be performed on their behalf. Here the question is, it seems that the person who is about to perform Hajj on behalf of the deceased is doing this either on a voluntary basis, i.e. he is not fulfilling a statement written and recorded by the deceased, but he is wishing, just for the sake of rewards for himself and for the deceased, to volunteer and perform Hajj on behalf of that deceased person. And this is allowed, because he is going to afford for this performance of Hajj, and he is not charging the heirs any charge. But if he is to perform the rituals of Hajj on behalf of the deceased, based upon fulfilling a statement written by the deceased, then the cost of the performance of Hajj should be taken from what the deceased has left, from the wealth of the deceased, because this is an obligatory act. It is true that the person is only performing it on behalf of the deceased, but it is on behalf of that particular person, so it is a fulfillment of an obligation that is originally addressed to that particular person. Now here we need to refer back to the issue of statements, because some people, they do write statements, because at that time when their statements were written, they do not have the means. but then circumstances changed and they became able, so they performed Hajj by themselves, but they haven't changed their statements. In this case, we need to look at the signs, any marks, any remarks in the statement indicating whether to fulfill their statements, or that they have already performed by themselves and there is no need to perform the Hajj. Occasionally they will need to consult scholars or even people who are familiar with such issues in order not to charge the wealth of the heirs left behind by the deceased what is not required. So this is our advice to our brother here. But generally talking, as I said, the general ruling is that this is something that is allowed, and both the person who is performing, the deputy of the deceased, and the deceased, of course with sincerity, are going to be rewarded for this particular act. Allah Ta'ala knows best.
Thank you, Sheikh.
حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل 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 حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل.
If you have any questions for the show, send your email at k.r@oman-radio.gov.om at k.r@oman-radio.gov.om, knowing your religion, or send SMS to 90406. Don't forget to indicate k.r before sending your questions. And for your comments and suggestions, check out our Facebook, Knowing Your Religion.
The next question says, there is an argument between two men or two Muslims on what should be the right position of the hands of the deceased during the shrining process, whether both hands should be on top of one another on the chest, or should they be placed on the sides of the body.
Well, I can understand the reason behind their argument, but let me make it clear. These are minor issues that we shouldn't have disputes on. We shouldn't have sharp arguments about, because both opinions have been adapted and accepted by many Muslim scholars. And as far as the issue is flexible, and there is this wide range of opinions about this particular issue, then we shouldn't be fanatic and argue against each other on this, as I said, minor issue. If the question is about what is the most or the strong opinion between those two opinions, then my choice is that leaving the hands on the sides of the body as the person is standing or lying on a bed is closer to be more supported by evidence, because this is the normal situation. If we are to choose the other opinion, then we do need evidence to support that particular opinion, and there are no evidence to support this opinion. Yes, it has been, as I said, chosen by some scholars, but it seems that they based their opinion upon traditions rather than prophetic traditions. These are choices of the companions, the first generation. May Allah have mercy on them. But if we refer back to most of their opinions, I mean the companions, the first generation of Muslims, then we are going to find that most of them are of the opinion that the hands should be left by the sides of the body, and this is what is also practiced here in Oman. But my point is, apart from this issue, is when we should have arguments, when should we have disputes, and what are our morals regarding arguments and disputes. So if we are, let's assume the same question that our brother or sister here are asking about, that we do have an Islamic issue regarding an Islamic ruling, and we all know that there are different opinions, and these opinions were adapted by respected scholars. So why should we now have these disputes? Yes, we do have the right to ask, we do have the right to question, we do have the right to find out which is stronger than the other opinion and what are the evidence supporting each individual opinion. But this doesn't mean that we can just ignore the richness that we have in our literature. We have to consider this, as I said, as a healthy phenomenon, as I always have said on this program, as a healthy phenomenon that should be added to our richness in our history and our literature. Even if we are to have arguments, then our arguments should be based upon good values and good manners. May Allah Ta'ala guide us all to the right path.
Thank you, Sheikh. The next question says, is performing ablution, which is the wudu, part of the ritual bath, al-ghusl?
Yes and no. I mean by yes that it is recommended, but it is not a must if the person is going to wash the parts of his body that should be included when he or she is performing the ablution. But if the question is, can the person perform the wudu, the ablution, then the answer, while he is making the ghusl, the great wash, then the answer is yes. If the question is that sufficient for him to perform or for her to perform the prayer, the answer is yes, providing that they are not going to touch their private organs afterwards. So if they are to perform ablution while they are making the ghusl, then let it be in this way. First of all, they are asked to wash their private organs, their sexual organs, and the places where the impurity have reached, and then they are asked to make the ablution, and after that they are going to commence their ghusl, their great wash. And in this case they must avoid touching their sexual organs directly. In this case, yes, this is an ablution that by which the prayer can be performed. But this is difficult for many of us to observe, and in this case it is better to postpone the ablution until the end of the ghusl, and in this case, yes, to maintain the safe side, that particular wudu or ablution is sufficient for performing our prayers. Now, Brother Hatim, I have also to add that if the person is not going to perform the ablution while performing the washing, then in this case the person is asked to rinse, of course, their mouth, because this is part of the ghusl itself. So if it is included, if it is going to be included during ablution, then there's no need to repeat it. But if not, then in this case it has to be included while performing the ghusl itself. Allah Ta'ala knows best.
Thank you, Sheikh. The next question says, we notice that many times when Muslims perform the funeral prayer, Salatul Janaza, they don't stand in a straight line. Does this invalidate their prayer?
Well, I can't say that it invalidates their prayer or it renders their prayer invalid, but they are asked to maintain straight lines. This is from one aspect a prayer, and we all know that performing prayers in Islam should be, for men at least, should be in straight lines, and this is part of the conditions of performing prayers in Islam. And on the other aspect, yes, it is a supplication because it doesn't contain prostration and bowing. Yet it is still a prayer where we are asked, as an example, to have wudu. And it is because of the takbir at the beginning. So we commence this prayer by the takbir, and we conclude the prayer by stating the salam. And all these are signs that it is a prayer, like any other prayer. But because it doesn't include bowing and prostrations, then in this case, from this side or from this aspect, it is similar to the normal supplications that we are making. So it is a special supplication or a special prayer. And because of that, we should maintain straight lines. But if these lines are not to be as parallel as they should be, I cannot claim, as I said earlier, that their prayer is invalid. Particularly if we are talking about a congregation of so many people in a limited place where it is very much difficult for them to maintain parallel lines. Of course, I mean, necessities bring ease as a general principle in Islamic legislation. Allah Ta'ala knows best.
Thank you, Sheikh.
Astaghfirullah wa natubu ilayk. 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 Astaghfirullah wa natubu ilayk.
If you have any questions for the show, send your email at k.r@oman-radio.gov.om at k.r@oman-radio.gov.om, knowing your religion, or send SMS to 90406. Don't forget to indicate k.r before sending your questions. And for your comments and suggestions, check out our Facebook, Knowing Your Religion.
Sheikh, the next question is related to the previous question. It says, what do we normally say during Salatul Janaza?
Right. After entering the prayer by the takbir, saying Allahu Akbar, So the first thing to do is to recite Al-Fatiha. And after that comes the second takbir. After the second takbir, there is a disagreement between scholars. Some scholars, and it is the opinion of the minority, they adopt the opinion that again the person should recite Al-Fatiha again. But the majority of scholars, and this is the opinion practiced nowadays in most Muslim countries, they are of the opinion that the supplication of making blessings and peace on Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his family should be stated. And as I said, this is the right opinion. So after the second takbir, saying the prayer of making or seeking peace and blessings on the Prophet, on the last Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family, in the known form, should be stated. Then comes the third takbir, or saying the takbir for the third time, and afterwards the supplication should be said. And it is, the supplication here are prayers in which the person is asking Allah to have mercy on the deceased, and to ask for forgiveness for him in the hereafter, and also to shower the Muslims who passed away with his mercy. And the person should also say some statements asking for the alive Muslims to have mercy from Allah the Almighty and be guided on the straight path. All the statements that are found in many Muslim literature on determining precisely the sort of supplications that should be said, they are all recommendations. They are not must do, because there isn't any single prophetic tradition in which Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has commanded his companions or this ummah to follow. The issue is very flexible. We can choose whatever prayers and supplications that we feel comfortable with. But the focal point here is that we should ask Allah the Almighty to have mercy on the deceased, and to ask for his forgiveness for the deceased and for those who are still alive, and to reward them and us for what we are doing, and to guide us to the straight path. And then of course the fourth takbir, after which comes the salam, just saying assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and that's it. So this is the funeral prayer. And by the way, it can be performed even if the deceased, even if the shrine is not present. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has performed it for many of his companions without their presence. When he was informed of their death, and his companions, may Allah have mercy on them, informed him that they took care of the funeral prayer, in some occasions he blamed them and he said that you should have informed me, and afterwards he performed, and it is called the Salatul Ghaib, the absent prayer. And as it is a good chance also, Brother Hatim, if you allow me just to base a very practical opinion upon this general principle. When I said that it is allowed and it is permissible to perform the funeral prayer even with the absence of the deceased, or with the absence of the shrine of the deceased, then we need to apply this in some cases when it is necessarily required. One of the current issues is the Ebola virus
in the African continent. So let's assume that a Muslim was affected and he or she passed away because of this particular virus, and medically talking, the virus can
be transferred. It is an epidemic disease from the dead bodies to the alive persons. So to avoid this, because it is one of the fundamental aims of Islam is to protect the life of the people, to avoid this, then we need to apply such an opinion. There shouldn't be any insistence on having the bodies present, the shrines of the deceased present while we are performing the funeral prayer. They can be buried first, and then we can perform the funeral prayer after burying them. As I said, this is based upon the general principle of necessities and based upon the general ruling on the Islamic tendency or Islamic aims, the maqasid al-sharia, where, as I said, protecting the lives of the alive is one of the fundamental aims of Islam.
Sheikh, as you brought up this topic about the Ebola disease in the African continent, as we know that there is a restriction from the government for people to travel to those countries which are affected. Now, maybe for the people who are traveling to those countries, they might be violating these instructions from the government. But Islamically, is there anything mentioned regarding traveling to the countries which are affected with such diseases?
Yes. I mean, if once a disease is classified as, when an epidemic disease is classified as a plague, then in this case, Islamically talking, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has advised his companions not to travel to that particular area, and he has advised the people who are there in that area not to travel away from their area. So such restrictions should be observed and should be seriously observed. And here it's the consciousness of, or the awareness of following the rulings of Islam and the teachings of Islam are also present. We cannot ignore that this is part of our Sharia, and it is not only a mere worldly regulations. They are based upon religious roots that are of course proven to be true nowadays. So we should abide by such regulations due to these religious roots.
Thank you, Sheikh. The next question says, I work as a butcher and I work for long hours, and most of the time prayer timings are during my working hours. Can I perform prayers with my clothes which are stained with blood?
Well, this is a very good question, Brother Hatim. Although it sounds simple, but let me elaborate that the blood which remains after the sacrifice of the animal, after slaughtering the animal in a way that is compliant to Sharia, this blood is pure. So even if it touches the body, it doesn't mean that the body or the clothes becomes impure and the person cannot perform the prayer with those clothes. I know that many people are asking such questions, but I'm talking about the blood remains in the veins or in the body of the animal after slaughtering it, not while slaughtering the animal. If we are talking about the blood that comes out of the animal while slaughtering it, not when it cools down and it becomes dead, then yes, this blood is impure, and one must clean their bodies, and one must clean his or her body and his and her clothes before performing the prayer. But if we are talking about the blood that comes after after slaughtering the animal and after its death, then in this case we are not talking about impure material. But just because Allah the Almighty has commanded us to perform our duties, religious duties, in the best possible way of cleanness, then it is highly recommended, no doubt about it, if it is possible. If not, then of course he or she is excused, whether we are talking about a butcher or whoever are handling such job. Our advice here to be practical, that they should have, of course, I would imagine that for butchers they do have a special, a particular clothing and uniform while they are handling the animals and doing their jobs. Let them remove these garments and put their clean clothes while performing the prayer, and then return back to their work uniform. But this, as I said, if it is possible. If not, then it is not an excuse for them not to perform their prayer. They must perform their prayer. If they do not have the means, or due to any unexpected circumstances they cannot, then they must perform their prayer. Even let's refer back to the situation when the companions were bleeding due to their injuries that caused during the battlefield. So they were performing their prayers while they were bleeding. This is unusual circumstances, and due to that, no single scholar has said that it is a must for them to purify themselves first and to stop the bleeding and then to perform the prayer. And it is exactly the same. Yes, of course, the necessity is not the same, but this is a very practical religion. It deals with all situations, with all circumstances. It provides its followers with practical solutions. Let them just understand it. Let them have deep understanding of their religion, and they are not going to face any calamities or difficulties in implementing their religion on their daily life. Allah Ta'ala knows best.
Sheikh, as we are talking about blood and blood stains, many people would be asking regarding bleeding while prayer. For example, bleeding from the gums, or whenever you're performing prayer and at the end of the prayer you notice that you have a stain of blood from a small wound in your leg, for example. Is this ruling the same to these conditions as well, or is it something different?
No, in some ways it is the same, and in other ways it is different. I mean by it's a different situation that this is caused by bleeding. So already bleeding is there, which means that this is a status of impurity. In the other way, many scholars, now we should differentiate between two cases. The first case, when it is something that is unavoidable, like bleeding from teeth or gum bleeding, or due to any disease that is unavoidable, and there's no way to stop the bleeding. So in this case, the person is asked to fulfill his or her duties and perform the prayer, even if they do have this bleeding. The second case is that it is not a permanent bleeding. It is just due to injuries, a temporary bleeding. Then in this case, they should wait until the bleeding is stopped, and afterwards they are asked to perform their prayers. Unfortunately, many Muslims, they do panic if they have bleeding and it is the time to perform the prayer. So we do appreciate their good intentions, but a prayer, as it is an obligation, it is a right for the person. It is a right upon ourselves, to ourselves, that we should perform this prayer, this salah that we are performing, with all the consciousness required, with all the comforts, with all the inner peace that we should achieve. We should focus, we should be able to concentrate on what we are reciting, on what we are doing, on the acts, the wordings that we are saying, so that we can gain the benefits and achieve the righteousness required from performing our prayers. And this cannot be achieved unless, as I said, we feel comfortable, we feel peace. But if it is something that it is just a duty that we should fulfill, and that's it, by any means, then definitely we cannot achieve the khushu', the righteousness, the taqwa that we are aiming at while performing our prayers. So, just to sum up now, in this case, if it is just an injury which caused the person bleeding and blood stains touching the body or the clothes, then in this case let them wash their clothes, stop the bleeding, and then they are asked to perform their prayers peacefully and with all the required intentions and consciousness. So this is the probably most of the cases that one might face. Yes, there is a minor disagreement between scholars on the amount which would render one's prayer invalid if the person performs the prayer with that stain of blood in his body or her body or clothes. Some scholars say that there is no need to, there's no count for the amount of blood. Even if it is like the head of a pin, then still it counts as far as it is caused due to bleeding. Other scholars say if it is less than the area of a nail, then in this case it is forgiven, and one should not bother by washing it up and cleaning it or from the clothes of the body, but they can perform their prayer immediately. This has some implications for those who would discover that their clothes or there were stains of blood in their clothes after performing their prayer. In this case, they can apply these different opinions because they are all sound. They are all, both opinions are standing on very strong evidence, set of evidence. Otherwise, if they want to maintain the safe side, then in this case they should clean their clothes first and then redo their prayers, re-perform their prayers. But we should draw the attention that if there is any reason, even a single reason, by which they can remember that the stain of blood was caused after performing their prayer, then they shouldn't repeat, they shouldn't have any doubt about their prayer, because the main cause, since it is possible to be caused, the stain, since it is possible, even if the possibility is very weak, yet it is still possible that it was caused after the prayer, then we should ignore any doubts, we should ignore the whisper, we shouldn't doubt our prayers. We should consider them as sound and right, and go ahead with it. Allah Ta'ala knows best.
Thank you, Sheikh.
Inna lillah, inna lillah, inna ilayhi raji'un. 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 Inna لله إنا لله إنا إليه راجعون إنا لله إنا لله إنا إليه راجعون.
If you have any questions for the show, send your email at k.r@oman-radio.gov.om at k.r@oman-radio.gov.om knowing your religion, or send SMS to 90406. Don't forget to indicate k.r before sending your questions. And for your comments and suggestions, check out our Facebook, Knowing Your Religion.
Sheikh, the next question says, some Muslims apply perfume or frankincense on a deceased body after shrining. Is this part of the Islamic ritual to prepare the deceased, or is it just cultural?
Well, no, it is not cultural. There are traditions ascribed to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and to their companions that they were doing this. Of course, they didn't exaggerate. This is one of the rights of the deceased in Islam. It is not a must. It is there's nothing wrong if they do not do so. But it is not a heresy, as some people might claim. It is not a heresy. It is not a bid'ah. And it can be applied for both men and women. Allah Ta'ala knows best.
Thank you, Sheikh. The next question says, is there any reason why the Imam stands in the middle of the deceased body during Salat al-Janaza when it's a woman?
Well, there is no reason, and this is something that is liked by some scholars. Those scholars, they do ascribe to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that this is what they have witnessed him doing. When the deceased is a female, then he would stand on the middle of the body. If the deceased is a male, then he would stand beside the chest. This has been noticed by some of the companions, that this is the way by which Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has performed the funeral prayer on the shrines of the deceased. Other scholars, they haven't differentiated, they haven't reported such narrations ascribed to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam or any to the companions, and they refuted the opinions of the other group by saying that if such a thing did take place, so it is a mere coincidence, and they base no legislation on that. Allah Ta'ala knows best.
Thank you, Sheikh. The next question says, is it permissible to consume kangaroos for food, knowing that they sort of have sharp nails or sharp claws?
Kangaroos are, of course, disputable within contemporary Muslim scholars. And I said contemporary Muslim scholars because we all know that this is not something that was known in the Arabia. And most Islamic countries, such animals were not found at all. I think it is the only place where it can be found in the wild is in Australia. Otherwise, it can be found in zoos in our countries. That's why it hasn't been one of the animals that were discussed in our classical literature. But in our modern literature, it is discussed, and the opinion of most of the contemporary scholars that it is allowed, because they base their opinion upon that the animals that are forbidden have been clearly stated and mentioned, and then the general ruling about animals that are not precisely mentioned. So when we are talking about wild animals, then the general ruling here is that if they have fangs, then in this case they are not permissible, they cannot be consumed. If they do not have, then in this case they can be consumed. They are allowed to be consumed, providing that, of course, they are going to be slaughtered in a way compliant to Sharia. So this is the general principle, and that's why, because they say that it doesn't contain. I mean, kangaroos, they do not contain fangs. Yes, they do have teeth. I mean, if
flat teeth, they
flat
have
teeth, yes.
Vegetarian flat teeth.
Yes. So in this case, they can be consumed according to those scholars. Some contemporary scholars, and there are the few of them, they adopt the opinion that at least this is something that is disliked and it cannot be consumed. But the first opinion is the right, convincing opinion indeed. Allah Ta'ala knows best.
So Sheikh, you advise us to get a few kangaroos.
Well, I think that it was provided to me, and but I didn't eat it, not because I doubt it, but because I didn't like it.
Okay, Sheikh. The next question says, is it permissible for a daughter to wash or bathe her deceased father?
No, in the normal situation, no, she shouldn't do so. The wife can. I mean, the deceased wife can, and this is based upon our mother of believers, Sayyidah Aisha, when she said that if I would have known, then we, the wives of the Prophet, should have washed him upon his death, peace be upon him. So yes, in the normal situation, in the normal circumstances, they are not allowed. I mean, the one's daughters are not allowed to do the washing for him. But if it is a necessity situation, there's nobody there, no men at all, and it is only it is only his daughters, then in this case, due to this necessity, then it is going to be permissible, but this permissibility is subject to them, I mean the daughters, trying to avoid, of course, the direct touching of the body, so they should wear gloves, and at the same time they should lower their eyes while performing their the washing for their father's body. Allah Ta'ala knows best.
The last question for today, Sheikh, says, are there any supplications to be recited during washing or bathing or shrining the deceased?
No, not at all. I mean, if we are talking about authentic supplications ascribed and recorded to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then there isn't any. If we are talking about supplications ascribed to some Muslim scholars, then in this case we might find, but if it is said by scholars, then it is no more than something that is recommended, but I do not think so. I haven't seen any. Yes, some scholars, they do talk about stating the intention for the person who is going to handle the body just before commencing washing the body, that they should state the intention that I am about to wash this body, so, oh Allah, accept this deed from me. If we are talking about burying the body, then yes, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has showed us that in a narration that one of the supplications to be stated is to say Bismillah wa ala millati Rasulillah. This is when they are about to put to bury the body in the graveyard, in the grave. While taking it is also a good chance to advise our listeners that while taking the disease, after performing the prayer or before performing the funeral prayer to the graveyard, if they are to make supplications, then this should be said silently. They shouldn't loud their voices, as we are unfortunately seeing nowadays that they are
chanting the name
of Allah and making supplications, or even they are talking on worldly matters, although they are carrying a dead body to a graveyard, yet they are not inferring this situation and trying to get lessons out of it, trying to softening their hearts. They are talking on their businesses, they are talking on very worldly issues.
Some of them even joke.
Some of them are joking, and of course this is not equal to Islamic teachings. This is not a sign of respect to the deceased and his family. They should calm them down, they should remove their sadness, and of course they should remember Allah and the life to come in such situations, because these indeed are very strong reminders, and if we let them pass without reflecting on them, then we are losing a lot. So we should, these are lessons Allah the Almighty by His grace are sending to us. We shouldn't let them go without benefiting from them. So it was just a piece of advice to our audience, as it was related to our question here. May Allah the Almighty enrich our knowledge in His religion and guide us all to the right path.
Sheikh Kahlan bin Nabhan Al-Kharusi, the Assistant Grand Mufti of the Sultan of Oman. Thank you very much, Sheikh, for your time and knowledge, and I hope our listeners have benefited from today's session. Dear listeners, I'm your host Hatim Al-Abdussalam, signing off for today. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.